everybody. Welcome. We're going to get started. I'm Maria Parenti, and I'm a volunteer with Storm Surge. Thanks for coming out tonight. So tonight we are going to be talking about towards a resilient water supply. Our speakers tonight will explain the water cycle and how our water supply is protected using the city's monitoring systems. These monitoring systems that the city uses were implemented by our speakers tonight. The monitoring system provides an early warning of threats to water quality, which enables early treatment options. We'll also receive an update on key projects to protect the water supply and the water treatment plant. Tom Cusick is the Superintendent of Newburyport Water Treatment Operations. Tom is responsible for keeping our water resources safe and delivering clean water to homes and businesses. Tom has worked in water and sewer operations for over 30 years. He has over a decade of managerial experience working with operating budgets, procurement, and managing projects. Tom holds a certificate of water treatment from the University of Massachusetts, Lowell, as well as water and wastewater treatment licenses. Don Kretchmer is a certified lake manager and principal of D&K Water Resource Consulting. Don has over 35 years experience studying water quality in aquatic systems, ecosystems in lakes, rivers, and watersheds throughout New England and across the United States. Don holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Natural Resources from Cornell University and a Master of Science degree in Water Resource Management from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Don has been working with the City of Newburyport for the past 7 years. He worked with the city to establish the water quality monitoring system, which we'll learn about tonight. Don continues to work with the city on a variety of reservoir and watershed issues. Julie Spurr Knight is the business manager of the Newburyport Department of Public Services. Julie will tell us about the Water Smart program. Julie's here, she's just in the audience. Julie will tell us about the Water Smart program, which was introduced last September. And Water Smart can be used by water consumers to identify leaks, conserve water, and save on water bills. And there is a handout on the Water Smart program. There's one on the table in this room here, and also on the table where you came in tonight. So, Storm Surge has accounts on Twitter and Instagram, and so if you have such accounts and you like to tweet or post on Instagram, we welcome you to do that. Our handles are up here on this slide, @StormNBPT for Twitter and @StormSurgeGTR and BPT for Instagram. Okay, so we also wanted to just advertise our next event. We will be here next month. It's the 4th Wednesday that we're having our speaker series this year. And so Wednesday, June 22nd at 7 p.m., our topic is Newburyport Energy Goals. Molly Edinburgh and Mike Strauss from the City of Newburyport will be talking about energy priorities, accomplishments, and greenhouse gas accounting. So in addition to being here live at the Senior Center, we're also broadcasting on NCM Hub Channel 8, and we also have a Zoom link as well. And there are some people dialed in on Zoom and hopefully people watching on Channel 8. We just want to give some special thanks because Storm Surge would not be able to put together this speaker series without assistance from organizations and people. So the Institution for Savings has given Storm Surge a grant to fund our speaker series for this year. So we thank them for their financial support. We thank NCM Hub. So the people over at NCM Hub, they are broadcasting our event live tonight. They're also capturing a recording, and that recording will be available on Channel 9. So we thank them. Special thanks to the City of Newburyport. They run and operate the building that we're in tonight, and they have provided us access to the Senior Community Center for our speaker series. Special thanks to our storm surge volunteers. We're a relatively small group, and I would encourage anyone, if you're interested in the topics we talk about, we're always looking for help. And if you're interested in participating with us, you can go to our website or you can come find me, and I'm happy to talk with you. Also, special thanks to everyone who came out tonight, either on the phone, on Zoom, or watching on Channel 8, in the room with us here. Thank you. The topics we're talking about that we bring to you for education, we think are important, and we can only make things happen by sharing the knowledge. So we encourage you to share with your friends and your family and to help educate everyone so that we can make progress with the climate change and all. All right, I'm going to turn things over to our speakers now. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Sarah. Mm-hmm.
Adjust this. Okay, thanks, Maria. And I think the people that we forgot to thank, or that she forgot to thank, are herself and Sarah, who pulled this all together, and they did a lot of behind-the-scenes work to make this all happen, and we're all grateful for that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Newburyport reservoirs. For those of you who aren't familiar, it's Indian Hill, Upper and Lower Artichoke, and Bartlett reservoirs. 4 reservoirs that provide about 80% of the water for the city of Newburyport. And I've been working on this for about 7 years, and looked at some older data as well. And they've come a long ways in 7 years in terms of their ability to deal with some of the water quality issues at Newburyport. So I'm going to talk about some issues relevant to water quality, kind of give you guys put everybody on the same page in terms of what's important. I'm going to talk about some reservoir data that's been collected and what direction kind of the reservoirs are in. Going to talk a little bit about what's being done in the watershed, and then kind of give a future direction for sort of where we go from here. I heard John Erick's talk from last year, and I'm trying not to overlap too much with that. He did a great job as kind of setting the table for this. So hopefully I'll give you some new information here. So what determines water quality? There's an awful lot of things. It isn't just a few chemicals in the water. The chemistry, the geology of the region, size of watersheds matters, the depth and volume of a lake or a water body matters. This one's a really important one. What's happening on the land that's surrounding a water body really shapes what that water body ultimately looks like in terms of water quality. Activities on the water can have an influence. The history. Sometimes we have lakes and reservoirs that are in poor shape, and everything looks good now, but it may not have looked good 200 years ago, and we're still living with the legacy of that. The aquatic community, lakes and reservoirs are living systems. There's things that live there. If the aquatic community isn't functioning properly, things can get out of balance and water quality can suffer. Weather and climate, I'll talk a little bit about that coming up. And then, episodic events, big floods, droughts, fires in the watershed. Those kinds of things can make a big influence on water quality. Phosphorus. I'm going to talk a lot about phosphorus. And phosphorus, it turns out, is the thing that determines how green or not green a particular lake is, or most lakes in New England, and certainly it's the case for the reservoirs in Newburyport. Phosphorus is the most critical number, or most critical nutrient. It's also the middle number in a bag of fertilizer. So when you go home and you see the lawn fertilizer that's in your, in your garage, look for that middle number. And if you live anywhere near surface water, which we all do, it should probably be 0. There is zero phosphorus fertilizer out there. The good news is that we have enough natural phosphorus in our soils. We don't need to add more. And anything you add now just puts the waters downstream at further risk. So I'm a big advocate of no phosphorus fertilizer if you feel like you have to fertilize at all. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So how did we get to know that phosphorus was important in lakes? This is an experiment that was done by a colleague up in Canada where they're fortunate to have a lot of lakes. So they're able to experiment with some. And they took this lake, I think it's Lake 223, they cut it in half with a curtain, they added carbon and nitrogen to the upper half, and then they added nitrogen, carbon, and phosphorus to the bottom half, and the bottom half turned green. The only difference between the treatments in the two was that they added phosphorus to the bottom half. Clearly, that was an issue. So wanted to duplicate that experiment. I did this in 2007 with my daughter, who at the time was only 10 years old. I took Lake Wentworth water, which is the lake down the street from me, and then we had Lake Wentworth water with lawn fertilizer. And we put them in the window for 2 weeks, and this is the difference in the two. The same things that make your lawn green make the lake green. So too much phosphorus grows algae. Too much algae can reduce water clarity, increases total organic carbon, which is a problem in the treatment plant, can deplete dissolved oxygen as all this green matter rots, and it may result in blooms of cyanobacteria or other toxic algae, which I'll talk more about in a minute. Both of these pictures are from the Newburyport reservoirs during a bloom. That's some pretty green water, and I think that's Pete's hand. He's in the back there. So one of the important things here is that the watershed is all this area here, which encompasses 3 different towns, and all of that drains into these reservoirs. So even if you can't see the reservoir from the outer parts of the watershed, that influences what the water quality is in the water bodies. I'm going to talk just briefly about what a typical lake will have in terms of phytoplankton, and those are the little green things, the things that make a lake green in the course of a year. In a healthy lake, a low nutrient lake, will have different communities come in at different times in the year, and they actually fit in well with the food cycle. So diatoms and green algae are really good food for little zooplankton. They get eaten up. Later in the summer, you get a few of these blue-greens, which we now call cyanobacteria. And then late in the year, we get diatoms again. Everything's kind of in balance. They're at low levels, enough to support a healthy aquatic food chain. When you have a high nutrient lake, things are out of balance. And you end up with a big bulge of blue-greens for either part of or most of the warm water part of the summer. And that's not a good thing, particularly for a water utility. Harmful blue-green algae or cyanobacteria, some of the issues are they can produce toxins. They aren't always toxic. We don't always know when they're going to be toxic and when they aren't. But there are species that are frequently toxic, and they're kind of known bad actors, and those are the ones we're looking out for. There can be the toxins can be nervous toxins or nerve toxins, liver toxins, skin toxins that can cause respiratory problems. Suffice to say, you don't want toxic cyanobacteria in your water supply or in lakes that you recreate in either. The higher the phosphorus, the higher the cyanobacteria or toxin potential. So if you got more phosphorus, you got a better chance of having these cyanobacteria happen, or the blooms happen. Bloom concentrations, which is enough to actually be see like we saw in the pictures, and I'll show you some more, were found recently in Indian Hill, Upper and Lower Artichoke, and historically in Bartlett Pond. So there's been cyanobacteria in fairly high concentrations noted in all of the reservoirs in Newburyport. It increases treatment costs, and it may trigger advisories. There was an advisory in 2020, and I'll talk about that bloom in just a second. So there's two main challenges to maintaining water quality in reservoirs. One is that there's continued development in the watershed. There's impervious surfaces that won't absorb water. So it allows water and pollutants to just run off into the surface water. And land use activities, there's agriculture, there's residential uses, there's commercial uses, and all of those things have the potential to add more surface water, which doesn't have the ability to be filtered at all by soils, and the pollutants that they carry to end up directly in the water supply. Changing climate. Increasing temperatures yield more water vapor and in the lower atmosphere, which means you get more rain, and you get increasing storm intensities and higher rates of erosion. It doesn't take, if you have a stream that's been happily developing along for a number of years, a couple hundred years, with a certain amount of rainfall, and you point a fire hose at it, it's going to start to unravel. And some of that material that's in the stream is going to wash downstream into the reservoirs and carry with it nutrients and things that fuel algal blooms. So this is some local data. One of them is taken right from Newburyport here. Average temperature in July and August has gone up since, I think that starts at 1920. Precipitation has also gone up. So, this isn't just a theoretical thing that may be happening. This is real data that says that it is happening, and it's something to be concerned about. So what does warming and wetting mean for the Newburyport reservoirs? Warmer weather favors bloom-forming species of cyanobacteria, and wetter weather increases nutrient runoff to the reservoirs. So you got hot water and you got more nutrients. It's like putting all the ingredients in a stock pot and setting it to boil. Stuff starts to grow, and we've seen that. Cyanobacteria like it hot. They tend to do better when temperatures are warm in the reservoirs, and these are the different groups of typical groups of algae in lakes. And if you look at it, 80 degrees, this is when all the cyanobacteria do well. So the warmer the reservoirs are, the more likely you are to have cyanobacteria. They'll be favored. They do better in those conditions. So August of 2020, I showed you some other pictures of the bloom. This is what the staff was faced with when they went out and looked at the reservoir, and they gave me a call. The guys were heartbroken. It was, and they're like, "Oh my God, what's going on here?" And we figured it out. And honestly, the response to this bloom was remarkable. These are just these are the primary players in the response to the bloom. There was 13 different entities that had a piece in responding to this bloom, figuring out what it was, figuring out what to do about it, and get beyond it. And from that, I think there was a lot of lessons learned about how to go forward and get kind of early warning of when this may happen again. I'm not going to go through them all right now, but there was everyone from government to consultants involved, to the city officials, and particularly the staff at the treatment plant really stepped up. They were there for the entirety of the bloom. So there was testing of the bloom. We had to figure out what it was. What species is it? And it turns out it was this guy, which is Dolich's spermum, which we used to call Anabina. The scientists like to change names all the time, and I'm not sure why, but it's the same species that's been around for a long, long time. It has a couple unique characteristics. It can form toxins. It often doesn't. It's kind of maybe one bloom in 5 is toxic levels to be concerned about, but it also can take nitrogen right out of the atmosphere. So it only really needs phosphorus to really get going, and there was plenty of phosphorus available at the time of the bloom. So yeah, as I just said, it can form gas vacuoles, which this allows it to regulate its buoyancy. So if you see a floating scum on a lake in August, it's likely to be cyanobacteria. They have the ability to go up and down in response to light and nutrient availability, so they come up and float at the surface at times. And those floating scums, if it's not pollen, which is what you see this time of year, it's often cyanobacteria. There are cyanobacteria, as we've been getting calls already happening in some lakes in the area. Not right in this immediate area, but up in New Hampshire, there's a couple lakes that have already bloomed during that little hot spell. So it can happen early in the year. It's more likely to happen in July and August. And I think I already talked about the toxicity. I'm just going to move along here. So while there was very low levels of toxicity found in artichoke, we did toxicity testing of the bloom. No toxicity was found in lower artichoke or the raw water or the finished water, which is good news because it was a pretty substantial bloom in upper artichoke, but by the time it flowed through lower artichoke and got through the treatment plant, there was no toxicity that was of concern. So the treatment in the reservoir, in order to knock the bloom back, and this is probably not the optimal way to do it, but it was fortunate that the bloom wasn't right at the point of the intakes, because sometimes when you try to treat a bloom, you can actually liberate some of the toxins by treating it. And most of the bloom was isolated to areas that were well away from the intakes. So about a week after the bloom was first noticed, they did copper sulfate treatment. Solitude Lake Management did copper sulfate treatment on half of lower artichoke to knock the bloom back. And then a week later, they did the other half of lower artichoke and half of upper artichoke. And by the end of August, the bloom was greatly reduced and it was pretty much gone by the 1st of September. Typically, you want to treat, if you're going to treat, right when you see a bloom coming on, rather than when it's at its maximum, because the sort of secondary effects of the treatment can be as bad as the bloom itself. So a lot of the sampling that we're doing now and that the city is doing now is designed to sort of get an advanced look at when the conditions are right or when a bloom is just starting. Just a look at bloom intensity, and the only thing I want you to note here is this is sort of upper artichoke, what it looked like, and the higher the number, the greater the cyanobacteria, and this is down near the intakes. So it never quite got in great number, or there never were great numbers of cyanobacteria down at the intakes. Cell counts kind of had the same story. The arrows were down at the intakes. Those were some of the lower values that we saw, and this is like number of algal cells that were counted. So there was a bloom in Indian Hill in the fall of 2020, and again, I got a call from the folks, and they were like, oh no, here we go again. Fortunately, this was a pretty isolated bloom that was blowing from shore to shore, depending on which way the wind was blowing. It wasn't all the way across the reservoir. It turned out to be a similar species to the one in artichoke, not the same, but similar. And what we think happened was this was a bloom that started on the bottom and then rose to the surface. So it took nutrients from the bottom and then rose up to the surface. Luckily, it was pretty localized. It didn't last real long, and there was no toxicity found. But it happened. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the monitoring program. All those dots are places that have been monitored more than once in the watershed and in the reservoirs. All of these little dots here. So there's a lot of spots. Routine monitoring, we monitor. The guys monitor at 4 reservoir stations 4 times a year, and then 17 tributary stations 3 times a year. And then there's multiple contingency stations, and kind of the idea is if you find a high value, you start moving upstream and try to figure out where it's coming from. And then that dovetails into how we're going to fix where it's coming from to get the concentrations down. We also instituted a cyanobacteria monitoring program, and that involves going out and actually looking at the reservoirs at least twice a week and seeing if anything looks out of place. That's like the first step, and that's called the bloom watch portion of it. See what, there's a lot to be said for just taking a look. Does this look different than it did last time? Is it greener? Is it not? There's a lot to be learned from that. If there is a bloom going on, we go into kind of the cyanoscope portion where we figure out what's causing it. what's making it green? And one of the things that we've been trying to do is develop kind of a library of images of these organisms as they appear in the reservoir, so that when something happens down the road, we'll know instantly, hey, this is what it is, this is what we did last time, this is what happened last time. So it's developing sort of that library of images so we can say, all right, we know this guy, we've had it before, it wasn't toxic, and we don't need to worry so much. Or this is a new one, we haven't had this before, this might be a problem. So it's that kind of thing. And then the last component of the monitoring is if you know you have a toxin, potentially toxin-forming species, is to do toxicity testing. And sort of this is what and I'm not going to go through this in any great detail, but there's quite a decision tree and a flow chart for what you do if you have a bloom and how you test it. And you continue to test until the bloom goes away, essentially, or until the toxicity's gone. And then go back to your routine program. So I'm going to take a real shallow dive into the data that they've been, that Newburyport's been collecting for the last 7 or 8 years. And so the important thing to look at here is this trend line. So the red line is, above that red line, means that the reservoir is likely to bloom, okay? In the middle, between the red and the blue, it may bloom periodically. And that's not an uncommon place for reservoirs to be. If it's below the blue, it's not likely to bloom at all. The disturbing trend here in Indian Hill is that it went from sort of may bloom periodically back in 2015 to now it's kind of hovering on that line of likely to bloom, which is concerning. And this is based on the amount of nutrients that are there to grow algae. The last sample here was taken this spring, so that's hot off the press, and that was pretty high in Indian Hill. Upper artichoke, you look at the trend line, even though it's relatively flat, it's well up into the likely to bloom category, and in fact, it has bloomed. Really, pretty high phosphorus concentrations there, and certainly worthy of some effort to address it. Lower artichoke, just below the likely to bloom line, and slightly increasing. Certainly, you'd like to see that lower. And anything that you do up in Indian Hill and you do in upper artichoke affects lower artichoke because they flow one down into the next. So really important to work all the way through the watershed. And this is the one where the actual intakes are. So this is a really important one to get right and to keep the nutrients low. Bartlett, that's actually got a more of a positive story. The nutrients have gone down quite a bit, and there's been some issues that have been fixed in that little watershed. Bartlett's the little pond near the treatment plant, and that's actually gotten quite a lot better, almost to the point where it's not likely to bloom. Tributary concentrations, I'm not going to go through where all these are, but as you can see, these are ones that have more than 5 observations. There's a couple of bad actors here, and the crew is definitely on that. And trying to figure out not only what it is, and I think they've come pretty close to figuring out what it is that's causing those high values of phosphorus, but what we can do about it and what can be done about it. And there's definitely wheels in motion to fix that. So this is something that we're just starting to work on, and it's sort of an interactive mapping product, working with Steve Lopez and then Pete King. Here at the city, we're trying to classify based on our data sort of what the condition of these tributary streams are. And these are really short streams over here, but they're all red, which is in the poor category. And these are some of the higher values as well that we saw in the data in the last slide. There's some red over here, poor condition. There's some red over here, poor condition. So what that tells you is that these are the areas that you want to start looking first for problems to fix. The other ones, the purple ones are kind of in fair condition. Once you fix all the red ones, you want to start looking at the purple ones. We didn't have, on this particular image, we didn't have any blue ones which are in good condition right now. So where's the phosphorus come from? We're talking about phosphorus. Where's it all come from? There's like a whole variety of sources, from natural sources, which are usually pretty low, to locally controlled sources. You know, gravel roads, ditches, shoreline erosion, lawn clippings, fertilizer, agriculture, impervious surfaces, septic systems. Pretty much anything that humans do in the watershed has the ability to move phosphorus from the watershed downstream into the water. Any way you can reduce that is helpful. You will reduce the amount of algae and cyanobacteria that'll grow. There are some instances, I don't think this is a huge factor right now, where you can get release from sediments. I think there's probably some release from the sediments in the reservoirs, but certainly not anything to the scale of what's coming from the watershed. So this is an important thing when we're talking about watersheds, and John Eric mentioned this last year as well, and I think it bears repeating again. This watershed to reservoir ratio, the area, so on the small end is Indian Hill. So there's basically, the watershed is 4 times the lake area. The rule of thumb we like to use is if the watershed is more than 10 times the size of the water body, it's really hard to control all the watershed sources. If it's less than that, it's a little easier to control the watershed sources. So I think there's a reasonable shot that you can control the watershed sources in Indian Hill. It's a pretty small watershed, you know, and pretty well contained. Once you get further downstream, you know, it's 29-1 at Upper Artichoke. I think you can still make some good headway there, and I think it's worth doing, given that this is a water supply. But it's a big job. And by the time you get down to Lower Artichoke, there's a lot of land area contributing to that reservoir, and it's a lot to control. Fortunately, if you control these two, you've controlled a lot of that, because they all drain one down into the other to the other. So that's an important number to know when you're thinking about watershed treatment. So where does it come from? Impervious surfaces. These 2 pictures are from the watershed. You know, all these rooftops, driveways, roadways, all those things have the ability to move phosphorus. I-95 is in the watershed. So this is based on some work that I did on each of these lakes. And sort of the only difference between these lakes is the level of development in the watershed. And as you can see, this one has very little development in the watershed. It has really low phosphorus. This one has a lot of development in the watershed. It's frequently green, and you know, it's a pretty clear relationship from low development to high. The higher the development in the watershed, the less forest in the watershed, the more phosphorus you have. The same thing is true for streams. And you know, I like to always say, if the streams draining into your water body aren't healthy, then the water body's not going to be healthy. It's a system. It has to all work together. And the more impervious cover, so the more hard cover in the landscape, the worse the water quality is. And once you get over like 10 to 25%, you're into pretty poor water quality in streams. So if your watershed is composed entirely of shopping malls and roads, you're going to have water quality problems downstream. Even densely packed residential areas, you may have water quality problems downstream. Eroding roads, ditches, trails, any place the soil can move, that soil has phosphorus in it, it goes downstream. Land disturbance and development, this is the same site before and after a development. This rock is that rock. A lot more phosphorus coming off of that site than that one. Not natural ground cover. This is one that may not be entirely intuitive, but there's many more times phosphorus that comes off of lawn, even without fertilizer, than there is the natural forest. The natural forest, it turns out, does a really good job of infiltrating and trapping phosphorus before it gets to the downstream water bodies. And in fact, most of the water still makes it there. It just makes it through groundwater at a much slower rate and not through surface water. So this number is even bigger when you use phosphorus fertilizer. Phosphorus fertilizer, I already talked about that a lot. A couple of bad practices there, throwing it basically in the lake. Septic systems, poorly performing septic systems can be a source of phosphorus, particularly when they're flooded periodically. This is a lake I worked on where the septic system was essentially draining right to the lake, and no surprise, there was a big algal growth there. Agricultural runoff, there's a whole host of activities related to agriculture that can cause problems. The good news is that there's a lot of funding to fix those problems, and that's been really pretty well studied. How do we keep agriculture from causing problems to downstream watersheds and water bodies? And I think that there are examples of that in the watersheds here, and I think people are looking into it already. Excessive waterfowl, this one goes without saying. Anyone who's seen goose poop and duck poop around lakes and ponds, it turns out that's really rich stuff. And that goose poop is like crack cocaine to algae. It can grow algae really quick. Buffers, short front buffers. This one, the buffer's gone. That is an actively eroding bank. This one, the buffer's there. Everything's stable there. So all that soil, this soil was quite a lot further out in the past. It ended up washing into the lake, carrying nutrients with it. Soil loss to streams and reservoirs. Anytime you see a delta like this is an indication that there's something going on way upstream in these streams that's carrying nutrients and sediments downstream. And it needs to be looked into. So here's the issue. There's about 10 times more phosphorus that runs off of developed or roads or ag areas than the natural forest. There's no way that we're ever going to get back to a natural forest. That's not what I'm proposing here. But there are ways of reducing it to get it a lot closer than we are now. So reducing the amount of phosphorus from the non-forest parts of the watershed is a primary goal of watershed management, and that should be where we should be thinking about doing some of the best management practices and focusing some of the effort. So what can be done? There's a variety of paths you can take. I'm going to go through just a few solutions, and then I'll pass this over to Tom. Hopefully we're not running too late here. So as I talked about, infiltrate, don't run off. It turns out that soil really likes to grab a hold of phosphorus, and if you can run water into the ground and have it return to the water body as groundwater, most of the phosphorus is trapped behind. If you run it directly into a storm drain, which goes in a hard pipe to a lake, none of the phosphorus is removed. So infiltration is like the best practice we have. Any chance you get to put water into the ground as opposed to running it off the surface is a huge benefit in terms of phosphorus runoff. And filter it through soil, organic matter, native plants, things like that. Drainage marking, no-brainer. Sometimes people have no idea where the water that goes down that sewer goes to. It'd be nice to know if it drains in the Newburyport reservoirs, for example. You can build infiltration structures. This is more of a commercial scale one for a commercial development that was in a watershed I worked on. The idea here is to trap the water, have it soak into the ground, at the bottom of this structure, and remove the phosphorus before it's released. Rain gardens, a simple thing you can put on your own property. Takes the water from your roof, from your driveway, from your yard, puts it in a rain garden, lets it go into the ground. They don't have to be ugly-looking things. This is a beautiful one that I was involved in, actually in my town. People love this, love to see it. It's a beautiful garden, and it functions to really protect water quality. It takes a huge parking area actually and filters it. Pervious pavement. So this is at a local high school. All the parking spaces are pervious pavement, so the water runs off the pavement and goes onto the pervious pavement and then goes into the ground, just disappears. So there's no surface drainage here. Really a helpful practice. Stabilizing ditches, either with vegetation and I was given a talk 2 weeks ago, and we had a guy who actually specializes in road work and stabilizing ditches, and his advice was, if you can make grass grow grass. If you can't make grass grow, use rocks. If the rocks don't work, use bigger rocks. But basically the message is stabilize the ditches. Don't let them unravel. And it's especially important where we get in bigger storms. Homeowner actions. There's a whole bunch of things you can do as an individual homeowner. No phosphorus fertilizer. If you don't believe that you don't need phosphorus, get a soil test done before you put it down. You may save money and not have to fertilize at all. Clean up pet waste, keep the lawn area to a minimum. Go with natural vegetation. You can spend more time at the beach. You don't have to cut grass on the weekend. Infiltrate roof runoff and driveway runoff wherever you can, and maintain your septic systems if you happen to be on those. Waterfowl management. Don't give waterfowl a chance to walk directly out of the water onto grassy areas. They won't do it. If they can't get to grassy areas, particularly when they have young, they will not go up on the lawn. So even a low fence like this does a really great job of keeping geese off of the lawn. There's a lawn area behind this beach, and it used to be covered with goose droppings. They won't go up there now because this little line there. This is the better solution, which is natural vegetation along the shoreline. They won't go through anything that's higher than their head because they're afraid of predation. So anything like this, they won't go. And then, of course, signage, keep people from feeding it to attracting ducks and geese. Wetland protection. This is, I've been collecting data at this spot for 15 years. This is up at the upper end. It runs through this wetland. This is phosphorus concentrations, really high at the upper end. By the time it gets down through the wetland to the lake downstream, much, much lower. The wetland's doing its job. Protecting that wetland is critical, and in fact, a lot of that is under conservation easement now. Gravel roads, there's lots of, if you live on a gravel road, or you have a gravel driveway, or you have gravel trails, or I know that the city has a lot of access roads that are gravel. There's a lot of resources out there for how to manage those. Local land planning and ordinances, there's a patchwork of different, 3 different towns in the watersheds of Newburyport's reservoirs. So there's a lot of different land management strategies, and I think it's worthwhile to go and talk with each of the towns about things that you could do, and try to get more of a unified approach to watershed protection. Land conservation, there's a lot of conserved land already in the watershed, which is a great thing, and I think it's a really good thing to continue. And there's funding for that through land trusts and grants and things like that. So watershed planning is happening right now through a bunch of the contracts. Some of them are here, and the city and myself and a few others, to answer these questions. How much phosphorus can the reservoirs take? Which areas are contributing now? Can we fix them? Which ones do we fix first? How much will it cost? I think all these questions are being asked right now. What solutions work? Which subwatersheds should be protected? Which ones are the absolute critical ones that we can't have go bad, that are protecting water quality? And what's the impact of proposed future projects in the watershed? I haven't worked in a watershed yet where I haven't gotten a call that said, oh my God, they're going to put a Walmart, or they're going to put a big development in the watershed. What's that going to do? And I think now, you have some of the tools. Newburyport has some of the tools to be able to answer those questions ahead of time rather than react afterwards. Water quality monitoring is a common thread through all of these actions. It tells you where you are, it tells you when things might happen, and it tells you whether you were successful at preventing things from happening, down the road. So that is the critical foundation for all of this. And, Newburyport has really stepped up their game there. And it's a credit to the guys in the back of the room here. They've really done a great job of pulling this all together and being on the spot. And Hillary Snook, I don't know if he's here. I didn't see him come in. He's with EPA, and this is him here. He's fortunate enough to live nearby, and he's helped out an awful lot with questions and last-minute things. So it's been really great to have him involved. So what can be done now? Continue monitoring, control phosphorus using the data to guide your actions. There are no scenarios where additional phosphorus loading will make the reservoir situation better. There are none. So think of it that way. Reduction is the key here. Source water treatment is critical in the short term and is a safeguard in the long term. I mean, that's like the last line of defense. Watershed control and nutrient runoff is the primary long-term solution. However, in-lake measures may speed rehabilitation if watershed controls are already in place. And I think we're going to maybe talk about a little bit more about that in the future here, not tonight, maybe at a talk next year. Set aside resources. Evaluation is going to cost money. Treatment's going to cost money. Protection and BMPs are going to cost money, and in-lake restoration is going to cost money. So now's the time to set aside resources, because this isn't going to be a free process. It took a while to get to where you are now, and it's going to take a while to get back. But I think, you're on the right track right now. Get the word out, and that's where forums like this are really important. Get the word out, and I can't thank the storm surge folks enough for helping us do that. Everyone has something they can do to improve water quality. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tom. He's going to talk a little bit about infrastructure. And I'm sorry if I went a little bit long. So that's just with the space bar.
Oh, space bar.
And that is the laser, just that button.
No, you wait. It's busy.
Okay, great. Yeah, so that's a lot, right? I got here 3 years ago, and if I saw all this before I was coming in, I'd be like, whoa, what's going on? What are we doing? Tom, you want to come in and run the water treatment plant? And let's all talk about some watershed stuff. So, yeah, it's been a big task, and it's been something that hasn't just been the water treatment plant. It's also been, obviously, the consultants. It's been the board. It's been administrations. It's been groups like this, and it's been the engineering department. We kind of all tried to team together and look at the problems that we have and work together as a group and come up with some solutions. We obviously know that going forward there's going to be a lot more to do, right? And Dawn laid that out pretty well. So with the algal bloom, that was the big one, right? That was the one that kind of set it all off. I mean, we were running around trying to get a handle on things, and the guys did a great job, and everyone kind of worked together, but it was definitely something that drove it home. This isn't something that, hey, it might happen. You know what? It did happen. So all the indicators were there. Some of my predecessors kind of got that in motion. There were a lot of things that were already happening before I got here. We just tried to continue that effort and kind of step it up a notch the best that we could. So this is the water treatment plant here. And, one of the things that we talked about was, what do we do when we have this bloom? And a lot was talked about toxicity. Well, the water treatment plant is not set up to treat toxicity from an algal bloom. So that's a problem, right? Because, if this thing goes toxic, then, we don't have what we need at the water treatment plant to be able to deal with that. And most of the time, that's dealt with GAC, granular activated carbon. So it's pretty important for us to make sure that we get ahead of the curve, and we're not behind it at this point. And we'll talk a little bit about some of those things. Let's see what we got here. So this is 95, and you can see the water treatment plant. Red button, got it. So here's the treatment plant here, 95, and this is the bridge going over. This is Bartlett Pond, just to kind of give you a visual. So this is something that the engineering department put together, and we checked some numbers. This is just a graph showing the topography and how the current reservoir system works. Right now, we only have one intake, all right? So that one intake is down here. That's at the lower artichoke. We don't have any way to pull water from any of the other individually to be able to maybe work ourselves around a certain situation that we might have out there. And there could be multiple scenarios with that. You can see here that the majority of the water sits up at Indian Hill. And because of the recharge of the upper and the lower, we really don't dip into Indian Hill until we really actually need it, which is usually in the summertime. It's another thing to note, this is a lot deeper, it's a lot cooler water, so if we were able to kind of utilize this in conjunction with some of the other ones, we can temper the water. There's a lot of different things that could possibly happen if we go down the road of putting in some sort of a pipeline or a way to better manage these sources. As an operations guy, I'm belt and suspenders, right? I mean, I always want something else to fall back on. I never want to just have one thing. We talk about resiliency and redundancy, and resiliency is the kind of the buzzword now, and it's important. But operational redundancy has always been out there. So when I first got in here, I saw some of that was somewhat missing, and started asking some questions. And So the city overall, when they started to develop their reservoir system and they looked at how they were going to move water, they did consider that many years ago in their master plan. But you know, money and things like that maybe get in the way. But I think now the time has changed, right? With climate change and everything that we're talking about and what Don showed about the nutrient loading, it's now more obvious that there's probably some things that we want to be able to address from an operations standpoint to build that resiliency and redundancy into the system. This is some short-term mitigation that we're doing right now, working with the engineering department and permitting. This is the lower dam here. And this is more for a backwater event. I don't want to, you know, beat it up too much because we're talking about water quality, but that is a concern that if we had a backwater event from the Merrimack River, you know, that could obviously pose a water quality issue. And, you know, this here is below current FEMA by about 3 feet, JE, and we're around there 3 feet. And so what we've tried to do is come up with this short-term plan, which would be a series of sandbags that we put out here that after we build this kind of stone foundation, it would give us some ability to try to address things kind of right away. And yeah, I can tell you this is the first place that I've operated in my 30-some-odd years that I've had to worry about a river coming into the drinking water supply, right? It's a pretty unique situation, and obviously it's an issue, so. So you know, what was I talking about? Well, the pipeline. Potentially what we're looking at now is, you know, it's been in the works. This is a long-term solution. It's obviously a lot of money. And the idea is to situate a pumping station somewhere at Indian Hill, and then we would choose one of these paths, and I want to say it's alternate 6 right now is kind of the preferred path. And we'd be able to end up putting in additional intakes. So we could use this intake here. We could run these in combination in different ways, and obviously the climate will dictate that as far as, you know, how we would do it, because you got to be careful about depleting this too much. As Don was saying, you know, the recharge here isn't really quick. The recharge here is quick. So I don't want to beat this up too much. This is something that we can probably talk about as we move forward, maybe another series. But I can tell you that proposals are in, and the city is active in looking at this project. And I'm hopeful that we'll get it off the ground, because I think it's pivotal. I think it's just a key project going forward that sets up the future generation to secure your water supply. Okay, so yeah, all right. So this Amesbury Interconnect, this was something that we kind of brainstorming as we were in like crisis mode, right? Like, okay, well, if this stuff goes toxic, where are we going to get water from? Typically, DEP likes a regional approach. You know, they really like to see communities have interconnections with other communities in case something happens. And that way there, you know, you're not just, again, it's that's redundancy, right, that you're going to have in place. Newburyport doesn't have that luxury right now. I was working in Groveland, and we looked at when they were doing the Clearwell here at the water treatment plant, that upgrade. They were in a similar situation, and we looked at a hydraulic grade line that would wheel water through Groveland into West Newbury and then into Newburyport. It's feasible. We don't have a commitment from anyone at this point that could happen. I do know that Groveland's situation's changed as far as the available water that they might have. And there's somewhat of a hydraulic deficiency between the two communities as it goes through West Newbury to be able to get it over there. So we said, well, man, where can we get it? Well, actually, Peter King in the back said, hey, how about we put a pipe over the bridge? I'm like, yeah, why not, right? I mean, let's talk about that. What does that mean? And it was really because we were really, quite frankly, panicking a little bit, you know, and what we needed to do. And it's not an easy thing. So I want to say there's a couple thousand feet of pipe that would have to go over here. There are no interconnections on either side at this point, but you know, the two communities have been talking about this. There is some agreement. It's not, it's only verbal at this point. There's nothing in writing, and that's kind of where we're at right now. I think the two communities need to put together an intermunicipal agreement so everyone understands what that might look like if we get into that situation. Permitting for this is almost done. So the idea is to put a permanent temporary connection, if you will, on either side. And that way there, it's sitting there and waiting in case, you know, God forbid we did need it. We would at least have a pathway to get a pipe across. It wouldn't be quick, but it's something. It's more than we have right now. So I think that is it. Now, I don't know if we want to go right into Julie and save questions or how we want to go ahead and do that, because I'm sure folks want to try and move it. Let's do Julie, okay.
Maria, can you check to see if... Good evening, everybody. My name's Julie Spurr. I'm the business manager for the City of Newburyport for the Department of Public Services. I didn't get my bio in it on time, so I'll give you a little background on myself. I have a bachelor's degree in business administration from Merrimack College. I have 24 years experience in municipal work, and I came on board in 2019 to the City of Newburyport. So I'm here tonight to talk to you about the new water smart system that I rolled out in September. So the reason we rolled out this new system is it's directly related to the metering system, how we collect your data to bill and collect payments, but it's also a customer service platform that you can monitor your consumption. You can get reverse notifications with it. You can set up leak alerts. It has a lot of bells and whistles on it. Currently, the way we collect our current data for water meters is a drive-by system. So the workers go out, they drive by and collect the data, and it immediately correlates back to me web-based with this new system. The reason we put this infrastructure in place, the Water Smart, is because we're headed towards a new metering system, probably in the next year and a half, because our meters are starting to reach the useful life. The last time we put meters in was in 2006. So we'll be heading towards a new meter system. And this new meter system will communicate once an hour. So customers will have the ability to see, you know, if you have a leak, you'll know within the hour. Currently, we collect every 90 days. So you can monitor your consumption. Right now, we only update every 90 days because that's how we collect. But when we move to this new system, once an hour, you will receive an alert. So if something's running in your house, you'll know about it. So this is the flyer that went out in September. And what you'll get is everything I just told you about. There's ways to save on the platform if you sign up for it and log on. There's all kinds of drop-down menus and all kinds of ways to save on your water bill, and how to identify a leak, how to fix a leak, maintenance items that you can do, and I'm going to run through some of those. So the best way to sign up is if you go to the treasurer's website, and as you can see up here on the right-hand side, if you look over on the left, it says Water and Sewer, and you click on Pay Now, that will bring you to this screen right here. So if you plug in your account number that's on your bill and your zip code, so if you're in Newbury, you plug in Newbury zip code, and if you're in Newburyport, you plug in Newburyport. So it's important to note that you have to have a water meter or a water and sewer account with us, with the City of Newburyport, to sign up for this Water Smart program. So that will bring you, say, find my account, and it will lead you through the sign up. If you have trouble, don't hesitate to call the business office. So I have a full staff that will walk you through. They can send you a personalized link to your email that will help you sign up for it. I I know a lot of people don't like to put their banking information on. You can still mail in checks, but I do urge you to sign up because you can set up for your leak alerts and also receive reverse notification for snow events, parking bans, paving, road closures, water main breaks, flushing. You can get an alert via landline, text, cell, or email. So when you sign up and you finally logged on, there's a big social media presence on your page. This would be your platform. It's to your meter, and this is your consumption that you would see. So if you can see up there in the middle there, it's my daily use. So you click on all kinds of drop downs. It'll break it down into gallons or cubic feet, because a cubic feet is how we bill per 100 cubic feet. You can see there that the mayor's tweets are there, our DPS Facebook page is there, in several ways on how to save on your bills. So to sign up for notifications, you just go to the communication preferences and you can choose, you can opt in or opt out. The leak alerts are turned on so that when we collect the data for your billing, if you're billing, so you set it up to what you want, at one time, the amount that you used the last period, or 2 times or 5 times, it'll send you a notification that automatically that you could possibly have a leak. And a leak can add up to a lot of money, and anyone that's had a leak knows that, they've seen their higher bill, and it can be quite costly. So how do we conserve and save? I got a couple of notes here. I wrote them all down. So I'm going to start with the inside of the house. So toilets, people call and say, no, none of my toilets are running in my house. So a lot of the times if the flapper is loose in your toilet, in the tank of your toilet, you won't even see the water going down the drain. You won't hear it. You won't know what's happening. The best way to find out if you have a leak in your flapper is you put a couple drops of food coloring in the back of your toilet. Within 15 minutes, if you see the color going down the bowl of your toilet, you have a leak. And you can call a plumber to repair it, or it's pretty easy to repair it yourself. And if you go to your Water Smart portal, there's videos on how to fix it yourself, or you can call in a plumber. So another thing is leaky faucets. Just a drip can add up to a lot of money. It can add up to, an average of 8 gallons a day, which is $38 annually. It's the small things like that you let go that can add up over time. Let's see, leaky shower heads, maintenance items like installing a recirculation pump can save you a lot of money. Replace old water softeners, those can save you about 25 gallons a day. That can add up to hundreds in the course of a year. Test the pressure valve on your hot water heater. You might want to call a plumber for that because it can be quite hot. So what happens is with the hot water tank, when it gets hot, it boils over and there's a relief valve there, and it can spit out a lot of water. You can lose water that way. So that's basically the inside. The outside, there's a whole lot more ways to save. So the biggest one we see in the office is irrigation systems. If you have an irrigation system, you should maintenance it every winter. Make sure you winterize it. That's the biggest place that we see, thousands of dollars in costs in one period if something's leaking into the ground. You can put sensors on your irrigation system that will know when it's raining out. Timers so that you're shutting on and off. Make sure that the system is fully maintained, that your heads are hitting the grass and you're not watering the street. I don't know how many times I've driven down the street and seen a sprinkler watering the street while it's raining out. So Install rain gardens, rock gardens. When you water your flowers, deep water. Perennials are a good idea. I'm a flower lover, and as much as I love those annuals, they do need a lot of daily watering. I have switched my home to all perennials because they really are easier to manage, and you need a lot of water. Watering at dusk and dawn is the best time because evaporation rates are lower. So if you're watering your lawn, you get your sprinkler going at noontime, that water is evaporating in a 90-degree day. It's better to water it either in the morning or in the evening. Let's see. So finally, I'm just going to move right to the rain barrel. Molly Ettenborough is in the audience. The rain barrels, Newburyport 2022 rain barrel. If you go to the website, is it on the website yet, Molly? It should be. Okay. If you go to the if you go to the sustainability website, this flyer should be there. They're $79. I have one at my house, and I water I have a small vegetable garden, and I water my entire garden with it. I just put a soaker hose in there, and sometimes I run out and I have to use the regular hose, but it does save you a lot of money. Does anybody have any questions?
Any questions on any of the topics here? And we'll ask you to come up to the front to ask questions if you have them, so that the people that are at home can see you. Art, if you have questions, come up. Can you come up?
I think I can speak.
Well, yeah, we just want people to be able to see you, and also if you speak into the mic, then. like-
John, I'd like to ask you a question about the multi-community watersheds as we have. Can you share which ones may exist that are doing an outstanding job in terms of collaborating, communicating, managing what needs to be managed? Because they probably have a lot of best practices that would be good to understand.
So the one that the question was, about multi-community watersheds, and that, it can be problematic because, oftentimes the people in the upper end of the watershed, the towns or so forth, they don't have any relationship to the water downstream. So they don't feel like they have any vested interest. And so one thing that I always used to say, is that a lot of those people who are in the upper ends of watersheds are often on groundwater wells. And a lot of the things you would do to protect water supply downstream, you would also do to protect your own well. So it's not like you're just doing this to fix somebody else's problem. But in terms of other communities, we just did a watershed plan a couple of years ago for Lake Sunapee up in New Hampshire. That's got 6 or 7 towns. And they've kind of done an outreach program where they've gone and talked to each of the individual towns and had sort of a back and forth with them to try to get everybody on the same page and realize why it was so vital to the area to protect this resource. That's one that comes to mind. Lake Winnipesaukee, I've done a bunch of watershed planning around Lake Winnipesaukee, and that's multiple towns. And the Lake Winnipesaukee Association has done quite a bit of that kind of work as well. It's a challenge. It's a challenge, especially when you have your water supply in another town, but it's not uncommon. There's a bunch of towns like that. Manchester, New Hampshire is another one. Their water supply is in the town of Auburn, and a lot of the watershed is not in Manchester. And they do a pretty good job of reaching out to the local areas, the local towns, and talking to. But it's got to be, you got to reach out. And you got to sit down with them, rather than just dictate from afar, because I don't think you get a really good reception if you do that.
Okay, that's fine.
Yes, I had a question on the phosphorus. Are there any state laws, regulations, municipal laws, regulations covering the use of fertilizers and other products that contribute to the phosphorus problem? And my second question is, if we were to lose all of our electric power to the city, how long would we be able to pump water, treat it, and deliver it? Also get rid of sewage if it's not in your area maybe, but.
Yeah, you want to go first, Tom? Yeah.
So the question was, if we lost power, how long can we pump water? So everything that we have is on backup generator. And most of those are serviced, pretty much all of them but one, by natural gas. So the city has full backup power if they need to go ahead and pump water. And it's. Sewer is the same thing. Sewer also has, they just had a little episode down there, but they ended up fixing their generator down there. But most of the infrastructure, not just in Newburyport, but pretty much, around other communities, they always have some sort of backup generator to be able to deal with that. How? Yeah, as long as the generator runs. So, I think there was an ice event, and Chris could probably, my assistant superintendent, was down three days. So 3 days, that was a few years before I got here. They had an ice event, and they were down for 3 days, and they kept everything going. So, it typically is, there's a bunch of PM that happens. Obviously, it's a mechanical situation, so, if they have a failure, then that becomes another separate issue. But, the idea is, again, to have that redundancy built into it. So I hope that answers the question.
So the question on phosphorus, are there bans and things like that, governmental, regulations and things like that. So on phosphorus fertilizer, Michigan had a ban a number of years ago now on phosphorus in fertilizer. And the trickle down from that, it actually had a pretty beneficial effect on some of the lakes there. The trickle down effect is that low phosphorus or no phosphorus fertilizers become a lot more available. Like every other issue, it's such a patchwork, across the country and in municipalities and so forth. Some of the best progress I've seen is sort of local regulation or local initiatives to have a local vendor stock low or no phosphorus fertilizer, and then do public relations to sort of get the word out that this is what you ought to be using. Because trying to get it from the top down is difficult. But some of the bigger initiatives like Michigan has resulted in a lot wider availability. Phosphorus has been taken out of a lot of detergents and soaps, and low phosphorus alternatives are available for all of those. And I would highly recommend them. I mentioned it in passing before, but I think it's really important before you put anything on the ground in your yard or in your garden is to test the soil. You might be just wasting your money. You may not need any fertilizer at all, but I will almost guarantee you won't need phosphorus. So you just, why put it down if you don't need it?
So folks on the Zoom line, does anybody have any questions they want to ask? Okay, we had a few chats. Are there any other questions here? You want to come up?
Thank you so much for your presentation. It was really incredibly eye-opening and informative. My question's about the lower Artichoke Dam, and if there is a backwater event or a surge of water from the Merrimack River up into the lower Artichoke, how likely is that to continue and contaminate the upper Artichoke and the Indian Hill Reservation? So that's the reservoir. That's the first part of my question. And then the other part of the question is, I heard about the short-term solution of putting like not a dam, but like sandbags and such. Is there any longer-term solution being considered for that lower Artichoke Dam?
Sure.
Thanks.
So as far as, what would happen in a backwater event, and, there's so many different scenarios that were looked at when they do these H&H studies, whether it's an inland storm or it's a coastal storm, if it's just storm surge. And I guess the worst scenario would be just storm surge, right? Maybe a hurricane comes up and we don't have any head pressure kind of pushing, because naturally that water flows by gravity and it does go over that dam. I think the Mother's Day flood was probably the one that might be on record where it kind of reached equilibrium. I wasn't here, but I was in the area. But in that particular storm event, there was a lot of water moving, so it was kind of pushing out. But to answer your question, we've asked the consultants that, and there is no definitive answer. So the idea of that would be, try to mitigate it in that short term that we talked about with the sandbags. There are things that we could do to fill the tanks and get that ready for a storm event in preparation of that, just kind of as a backup. But ultimately, there's still some questions that need to be answered with that, and and even the experts were hard to give us a strong, firm calculation about what that might look like. The long term, there's multiple ways, I guess, to look at the long-term solution. My personal opinion is the Indian Hill pipeline, because at that point, you have multiple areas to pull from. So if you have a situation where you have a backwater event, and if it's into the upper Artichoke, that's a serious, I think it's 100-year. So is it possible? It is, but the most probable is the lower. But if you had multiple ways to pull water from each individual reservoir, you could simply shut that area down while the storm event happens. Because the storm event's going to come in and then it's going to recede, right? It's not going to just come in and stay and hang there for a long time. At least, I don't think in my lifetime. Obviously, over time, those situations might change. And the other option would be to actually look at raising that dam and what that might look like. Those are, part of the, and I guess I would reference back to the Time Bond report. If you folks want to, it's a thick report. There's a lot in there, but there is an executive summary that kind of, prioritizes and actually puts together a grading system of, which tactic will give you the best bang for your buck, if you will. You can see that, some of the work down at the lower Artichoke, would be somewhat specific just to that area, and it may not help with other things. The pipeline itself, it addresses water quality in that we can pull water from different places. It addresses drought because of the overland transfer from Indian Hill down. That would be in a conduit now and in a pipe, so we wouldn't have loss there. And it addresses redundancy with an alternate pump station also. So it really does check off all the boxes. In my opinion, it's the key project for the city at the supply to take and harden that whole system up.
Do we have anybody on Zoom that wants to ask a question? If you do, just come off mute and you can ask it. I think it's good. Anybody else here? Come on. My question is about the copper sulfate treatments. I was curious to know if there's been any testing done that they use the treatments earlier in the season to work as a preventative, and if there's any adverse effects from the copper sulfate to the water source. And then I also wanted to ask Tom about if it's during this increase in the season, of course during the season, and you can't treat the blooms, but you can treat the effects of the blooms. Is that when we're using more of the chlorine and other disinfectants, and is that why we're seeing the unsafe levels of the trihalomethanes? That's the effect of that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when I got in here, I termed this whole thing a source-to-tap approach, right? Trihalomethanes, disinfection byproducts, related to TOC and what that means, and specifically in the summertime. So it is all connected in that there are things that we can do at the sources, and specifically if we augmented how we use them and bring, so for instance, there's less TOC in Indian Hill than there is in the other two reservoirs. The summertime is a really a tough time for us because that water coming into the plant can be 80 degrees from the lower, because you know the average depth of those reservoirs is like 5 to 6 feet, so it's very shallow. So you know, to answer your question, I mean, yeah, I mean, if we're constantly monitoring how we treat the water, and there are other things that we do at the plant to be able to dial in on that, as far as the chemical treatment that we use and the processes and the jar testing and the lab work that we do to try and get it to the point where we don't have to add a lot of chlorine. But we do have to have trace amounts in there at these endpoints, and that becomes problematic with the THMs that you're talking about. In fact, the city had a violation, I want to say it's 2016. But the guys have done a phenomenal job. We've really made some great strides at the plant. This, talking about how we manage the reservoirs, that's a longer term thing, right? It's something it's going to be a lot of money, and over time that I think will pay dividends for sure. But right now, some of the things that we do in the distribution system, the guys are doing a good job flushing all the hydrants. That's why they flush every year. It's not just to spread that water out all over the place. It's that turnover. And because there's a relationship to, not a lot of turnover in the pipes, and something that you need to probably keep in mind is when engineers design water systems, they design them primarily for fire protection. They don't design them for water quality. So these big water mains just sit there waiting for a fire. So the turnover of the regular daily use isn't that great, and that's why they go out and do the flushing. So again, it is a source-to-tap approach that we're trying to look at. It's a holistic approach that we're trying to hopefully implement, and it's going to take some time, but some of those short-term practices are really, we're seeing THM levels very, very low now, and that's just been a tribute to my staff and the staff out there and the distribution crew, and so yeah, well, we're constantly working at it.
So I think the first part of your question was about copper, right? Yeah, so copper it's a herbicide, right? So when you need it, you need it. And so when you have a bloom coming on, I don't think you should hesitate to use it, but you don't want to use it as kind of a preventative thing, because it is a herbicide. A portion of it ends up in the sediments, and it will affect other things in the aquatic system, at least in the short term. If you use it for years and years frequently, you may have some longer term, ecological effects. But it's been used in water supply reservoirs for years and years and years. And it's one of those things, I think it's a tool that you need in your tool chest, particularly where you are right now, to stop the worst impacts of blooms. To get them before they really get going. That I think is a useful application for it, but I wouldn't use it as a preventative, And part of that is because the flushing rate is so rapid in the reservoirs that you would put it out there, and it would blow right through the reservoirs and be gone, before any bloom happens. So you want to use it in response to something, a known threat. It's like, oh, we got this species. It could be, it may or may not be toxic. Maybe we want to knock it back before it gets to be a problem.
So, thank you so much for speaking with us. I had very little idea of all of this, and this has been extremely informative. I think we need to have a much higher awareness in our community of all of this. So a couple of questions. First, relative to the phosphorus levels that we have in the water supply, is there anything that can be done now or is being developed as future technologies, so forth, to try to deal with the phosphorus that's there? I think there's one set of problems trying to stop it from getting there. Once it's there, is there anything we can do? And the other question I wanted to ask is specific to Newburyport and our water treatment facility. Is there anything that we could or should do to modernize, update, refit, to make it more effective at dealing with the issues that we have today and what we see coming in the near future?
So a couple of great questions. So I'll deal with the phosphorus one, then Tom can handle the treatment plant one, or the treatment side of it. So yes, there are things you can do in lake. They're usually a lot more effective if you've already dealt with what's coming in on top of it, because you just end up burying whatever fix you put in there with new phosphorus that came in from outside. The flushing rate, as I just alluded to with the copper sulfate, is really rapid in these reservoirs. So not a lot of the phosphorus ends up in the Merrimack River, ultimately, after it grows its algae and so forth. So it comes out of the watershed, flows through the reservoirs, grows algae, and then works its way over the dam and out to the Merrimack. A portion of it does settle in the reservoirs, and under certain conditions could come back to sort of haunt you. And there are ways to deal with that, but the time to deal with that is after you've already, at least gotten the easy fixes in the watershed done, because it's just a sound way of investing your money. You don't want to do something that isn't going to last. I suspect, and I'm fairly certain that right now, stuff coming from within the reservoir is a smaller part of the problem than what's coming from the watershed. It is important, and but it's not driving the process right now. The watershed processes are.
Yeah, so, great question on the treatment plant, and the answer to that is yes. So we currently have a proposal in front of us, and we have it in our CIP plan to look at a facilities update. So what is it going to look like in the next 20 years or so? It's all money, and it comes down to that. But I think having a plan in place is the right thing to do. You got to remember, that portions of the plant date back to the 70s, and things were just kind of added on, and as technologies came on board, they added things. One of the things they didn't add was the GAC, and that's something that we'll probably be looking at. So because it's a conventional filtration plant, there's other processes that we'll also be evaluating. But overall, it'll be, what do we have right now? What can we do and work with what we have versus what does it look like for a brand new plant in the future, and kind of weigh those plus and minuses out. But in the end, it'll end up being, I don't know if it'll be in my career, but because there's some pretty heavy lifting to do with some bonded debt that goes along with this. But it's certainly something that's part of that source to tap approach. That's in the middle, right? So we have the source and we have the tap, and in the middle's the treatment itself. But yeah, it's not going not looked at, that's for sure. Yeah.
Thank you for this, very informative. I'm kind of curious, how many people are here that live in the watershed? Oh, that's pretty good. Okay, that's more than I thought, because I'm wondering, watershed. I'm a South Ender, but every time I drive out to the west end of watershed, there's a lot of green lawns and a lot of cows. And I don't know, what are we doing to communicate and tell people not to use phosphorus besides a session like this?
John ever get up? Did he go out? He does that to me sometimes. He does that to me. Yeah, great question. So it's really been, when I first got here, there were a lot of things that were on the books, and one of the first people I grabbed onto was John Eric, and I said, hey, what are we going to do out here? What do we need to do? And we learned a lot over the last couple of years. We really did as a group, and we know that it's going to take a lot of time. So we have consultants, quite frankly, in the room that have been we've reached out to, and we're hoping to bring on board to kind of make that connection with everyone. It's going to take time. It certainly is. I think we've got a good base. We've got some good information. We've got the data to show people. This forum is obviously huge to get out there for the public, but the kind of interaction that they talked about from community to community is probably a piece that needs to really happen, and that really came out in the Tie and Bond report too, to maybe form some sort of a coalition between the communities and put together something that is, maybe it's a meeting once a month or something like that, just to kind of talk about those things. So, yeah, I mean, there's just a lot. If you look at the capital plan, everything that it's in that plan. It's there. We're asking for it. Whether it all gets funded, I don't know. I know it's got a lot of support, not just, grassroots here, but I know the administration looks at it and supports it. Obviously, our Water and Sewer Commission looks at it and supports it. And, the DPS and Tony, the director, it's a lot. It's a lot of money. So it's about prioritizing that and kind of picking away at it. And I think in the last budget talks, I had one of the councilors ask me, he's like, well, if you would just pick one, what would you do? And I'm like, well, man, we need to do it all. I mean, you got to do a little bit and try to keep it all rolling. The big thing, again, I go back to the Indian Hill line. I just think that's just so important. But yeah, we're constantly trying to make those connections, and I think we'll get there.
Any other hands? Last question? All right. Well, I'd like to thank all three of our speakers tonight. You guys did a great job. Thank you to all of you for coming out, everybody who watched online or on the television, and go Celtics.